Hello and welcome back to another evening together. Get yourself comfortable. If you're in bed, brilliant, that's exactly where you should be. If you're on a sofa with a blanket pulled up and the lights down low, that works too. If you got a cup of tea going cold on the nightstand, don't worry about it. None of that matters right now. Wherever you've settled in tonight, I'm glad you're here. Tonight we're going to be talking about Dexter, which, if you spent any time on this channel before, probably doesn't surprise you in the slightest. We come back to Dexter the way you come back to a place you know well, not because you need directions anymore, but because there's something genuinely comforting about familiar territory. The Miami sun, the title sequence with the eggs and the blood orange juice and the floss moving between the teeth, while Michael C. Hall watches himself in the bathroom mirror. The sardonic inner monologue that frames acts of genuine violence in the calmest possible language. There is something deeply strange about how relaxing all of that is, and I have thought about it at length, and I don't have a satisfying conclusion. Tonight, specifically, we're going to be talking about the moments in that show that changed everything. The plot twists. Not in a rapid-fire, eyes-wide, heart-pounding kind of way. We're not doing that. We're doing the opposite of that. We're going to take our time with each one, sit with it, understand what was built before it happened, and what got dismantled after. These are the moments where the writers essentially flipped the table over and said, right, everything you thought you knew, think again. And we're going to go through them season by season, slowly, with no particular urgency, the way you might talk through a show you love with someone who loves it too. Dexter's a show that rewards this kind of slow, careful attention more than most. It was designed to hold up under scrutiny. The original series showrunner Clyde Phillips, who ran the show for its first 4 seasons and came back to oversee New Blood and Original Sin, has spoken in interviews about the care that went into plotting about building seasons around a single central question and making sure every element was in service of that question. That care shows. When you go back and rewatch the early seasons in particular, knowing what's coming, you find things you missed the first time. Small gestures, lines that read differently with the full context, moments that seemed incidental and turn out to have been essential. That's the kind of show Dexter is at its best. And that's why revisiting the plot twists isn't just an exercise in recapping what happened. It's an examination of craft, of how you build a story toward a specific moment without the audience seeing it coming, while making sure the moment feels inevitable in retrospect. There are a few things worth saying at the outset. Dexter ran for 8 original seasons on Showtime. That's 96 episodes, and every single one of them was essentially about one question. How long can a man sustain 2 lives before they collapse into each other? It's since grown into a proper franchise. New Blood came along in 2021 and gave us a sequel set a decade later that most people, including me, thought was closer to the ending the story deserved. Original Sin arrived in late 2024 as a prequel, set back in 1991 Miami, showing us a younger version of the man we spent 8 years watching. And Resurrection, the most recent chapter, is still unfolding, but that might be a conversation for another evening. The franchise has produced, across all of its iterations, 126 episodes as of the first season of Resurrection. That's a lot of television built around a single character, a single question, and the fact that the question is still interesting, that Dexter Morgan, after all of that, is still generating new angles, new contexts, new ways of looking at the same fundamental problem, says something about both the character and the performer at the center of it. There are franchises with more episodes that have long since exhausted their central premise. Dexter, at its best, hasn't. Tonight we're working chronologically through the original series and then stepping into New Blood and Original Sin because the twists in both of those deserve the same care and attention as anything in the original run. We'll do it properly, no rushing. I've been thinking about what makes a Dexter plot twist different from the ones you get in other shows, because there are plenty of shows that do shocking moments. People die unexpectedly, Secrets get exposed, alliances collapse overnight. That's the grammar of prestige television, and Dexter uses that grammar fluently. But Dexter's best twists tend to do something specific that goes beyond the mechanics of surprise. They don't just change the plot, they change the moral architecture of the whole thing. They shift who we're rooting for and why, and whether that rooting is even something we're comfortable with. They ask you to take a step back and re-examine everything that came before, and they usually reward that re-examination. That's a harder thing to pull off than it sounds, and the show managed it repeatedly, at least in its best years, which we are going to spend a long time talking about. If this is the kind of content you enjoy and you haven't subscribed yet, there's no pressure, but the button is right there. There's more of this coming. For now, let's just get settled in and get into it. One more thing before we begin. I'm aware that talking about plot twists in a video like this, a long, slow, unhurried video meant to accompany sleep, might seem like an odd choice. Aren't plot twists supposed to be stimulating? Aren't they the parts of a show that make you sit up and grip the remote? And the answer is yes, in the moment they happen. But we're not watching the episodes tonight. We're reflecting on them from a comfortable distance. We know how these things resolve. We've processed them already. What we're doing now is something different, examining the architecture of those moments, understanding what made them work, sitting with the emotional residue of the stories they changed. That's not a tense activity. That's the kind of thinking that works well in the dark, at a slow pace, when there's nowhere else to be. There's also something specific about the way Dexter's twists function that makes them unusually suited to this kind of reflection. Most of them are not surprise for surprise's sake. They're the accumulation of things that were always true, finally becoming visible. Brian Moser was always Dexter's brother. Lila was always capable of what she did in that cabin. The church was always where Deb was going to find out. The twists in this show tend to feel, in retrospect, like inevitabilities, like the story was always heading exactly here, and you just couldn't see it yet. That's a specific kind of craft, and it's worth spending time on. So that's what we're going to do. Season 1 of Dexter has one of the most satisfying structural reveals in television, and I think part of the reason it works as well as it does is because the show was so careful for so long not to tip its hand. What you're watching for the first stretch of that first season is something that looks and functions like a fairly conventional Miami crime procedural. A serial killer is leaving bloodless, dismembered bodies around the city. Miami Metro are baffled. The killer, who the press has dubbed the ice truck killer because of how the blood was drained and the bodies preserved and kept, seems to be operating well above the department's ability to catch him. He's leaving no useful forensic evidence. He's meticulous, he's patient. And meanwhile, Dexter is doing his thing, going to work, doing blood spatter analysis, making dry observations to himself about human nature, quietly living his double life. The early episodes of Season 1 spend a lot of time establishing Dexter's world. The apartment, the boat, the slice of life, the colleagues, Musuku with his inappropriate humor, Angel Batista with his warmth, Dokes with his permanent suspicion, Rita and her kids, and Deb, who at the start of the season gets into a new relationship with a man named Rudy Cooper, a prosthetist, kind and attentive and clearly devoted to her in a way that felt, if you were watching it for the first time, like a genuine bit of good news in an otherwise fairly complicated life. What made the ice truck killer feel different from the first episode wasn't just the grotesque method, though the method was certainly distinctive enough. It was that the clues felt personal in a way that was hard to articulate initially. A bloodless doll left in Dexter's freezer. Crime scenes staged at locations connected specifically to his childhood, not Miami in general, but Dexter's Miami. The places he'd been as a boy. The show established this feeling of specific targeting early, and it let it sit without explaining it, which was exactly the right choice. You got the sensation that this killer knew something without yet knowing what that something was. Running alongside all of this, Rudy Cooper settled into Deb's life with a kind of ease that felt almost too good. He was charming without being slick. He was interested in Dexter in a way that could have read as future brother-in-law enthusiasm. He was attentive to Deb in a way that genuinely seemed to make her happy. And the show was smart enough to let that warmth sit there, undisturbed, long enough that you believed it. You wanted it to be real. Deb didn't get many clean wins in her romantic life, and Rudy felt like one. There were signs, of course. There are always signs in retrospect. His unusual fixation on the Morgan family as a unit. His interest in Dexter that was occasionally a beat too focused, a note too specific. The moments where something behind the eyes didn't quite synchronize with the warmth of his expression. But the show played it so carefully that even when you noticed those things, you talked yourself out of them. You told yourself you were being suspicious of the wrong person. Then, in the episode Shrink Wrap, it detonates. Rudy Cooper is the ice truck killer. His real name is Brian Moeser, and he is Dexter's biological brother. Let me back up, because to understand what that revelation actually means, not just as a plot development, but as an emotional event, you need to understand the origin story that underpins the whole show. Both Dexter and Brian were present as very small children when their mother, Laura Moser, was murdered in a shipping container. A drug cartel execution. The details are brutal, and the show is not shy about them in the flashbacks. Brian was older. Dexter was around 4 years old. They sat in that container for 2 days before anyone found them, in the blood of their mother, and the experience did to both of them what you'd expect it to do and more. Harry Morgan, a Miami detective who had known Laura through his work, found Dexter in that container and eventually adopted him. He saw something in the child, a darkness that Harry, being a perceptive man, recognized would need to be shaped rather than suppressed. And he brought Dexter home. Brian was left behind. He went into the system without Harry's guidance, without the code, without any framework for what had been done to him. Harry knew Brian existed and made a deliberate choice not to bring him into the family. That choice is one of the great unexamined moral decisions of the original series. Harry probably saved Dexter's life by making it, and probably destroyed Brian's by making it, and the show is honest about both of those things. Brian eventually found his brother, and rather than simply making contact, picking up a phone, writing a letter, any of the things a person with normal social development might have tried, he built an elaborate and methodical killing spree specifically designed to get Dexter's attention. Every murder, every planted clue, every bloodless scene staged at a location from their shared childhood, it was all communication. A deeply disturbing, entirely illegal form of communication, but communication nonetheless. Brian had not learned what most people learn about how to reach out to someone. He had learned something else entirely. The scene where Dexter responds to Brian's Craigslist message and walks into a freezer full of severed limbs and a dismembered Barbie doll, and the camera holds on his face for a moment before the realization fully forms, is one of the finest individual moments in the first season. There's no dramatic music cue trying to tell you how to feel. There's just Dexter's face and the silence and the slow assembly of understanding. And then the second wave. This is not just the ice truck killer, this is family. Let me pause here and talk about the specific mechanics of how the show hid this twist, because I think it's worth examining. The writers used two techniques simultaneously. The first is familiar. They made Rudy Cooper charming and pleasant, and plausible enough that you accepted him as what he appeared to be. The second is less common and more impressive. They seeded the ice truck killer scenes with information that should have pointed toward a connection to Dexter, but they filtered it through a lens of professional interest rather than personal one. When Dexter found the bloodless doll in his freezer, the show framed his response as the response of a forensics expert encountering a provocation rather than the response of someone being reached out to. His professional framework was used to obscure the personal reality. That's a clever piece of misdirection because it uses the audience's knowledge of Dexter's character against them. The reveal also functions on a third level that I don't think gets discussed enough. It recontextualizes everything we know about Dexter's psychology. Because the ice truck killer's methodology, bloodless, preserved, arranged, is not random. It mirrors Dexter's own forensic approach in significant ways. Both of them think about blood, both of them are precise. Both of them have a relationship with death that is clinical on the surface and deeply personal underneath. Brian and Dexter share an origin, and that origin shaped them towards similar tendencies. The difference is the code. The difference is Harry. The difference is the years of shaping versus the years of the system. And the revelation makes you wonder for just a moment about the thinness of the line between them. What the twist immediately forced on Dexter, with very little time to process, was a choice that the show had been quietly building toward from its first scene. Brian captured Deborah and presented Dexter with a condition. If their bond meant anything, if blood, biological blood, meant more than the adopted family that had shaped him, then Dexter needed to kill Deb to prove it. Kill the sister, keep the brother. Dexter chose Deb. He killed Brian, staged the death as a suicide, and walked away from the only blood relative he had ever found. That choice was the show's first real thesis statement, and it matters enormously that it was put to Dexter so immediately. The code is not just a set of rules Harry handed down. It's the architecture of who Dexter is. When it was tested in the hardest possible way, at the very end of the very first season, it held. And briefly before we move on, Deb's reaction to this revelation was managed in a way that set the template for how the show handled secrets. She didn't find out the full truth in season 1. She knew Rudy was the ice truck killer, and she knew that was devastating. She did not know yet that Dexter had killed him. She did not know what her brother actually was. The show layered the revelation, giving Deb one terrible piece while withholding the larger ones, because the show understood that its long game depended on Deb not knowing the full truth too early. When she did eventually find out years later in a church in season 6, the weight of everything she hadn't known would be part of what made it land. Season 1's management of Deb's knowledge was the first careful step in a very long series of them. I've always found it interesting how many people say they suspected Rudy relatively early in season 1. I genuinely did not the first time. There was something about Christian Camargo's performance that I read as TV normal rather than TV suspicious, a kind of pleasant oddness that I attributed to good character writing rather than concealment. And I think that's a genuine credit to both the writing and the casting. Camargo had to walk a very specific line, charming enough to fool Deb, interesting enough to fool the audience, slightly off enough that the reveal felt earned rather than arbitrary. He got it right. And he'd come back in later seasons in visions and hallucinations, brief appearances that, on rewatch, are genuinely touching in a strange way. One more thing worth sitting with in relation to this twist. The show established from season 1 that no new character can be entirely trusted. Every subsequent season's villain, every new relationship Dexter forms carries this shadow. You watch Miguel Prado, and you think of Brian. You watch Lumen, and you wonder if she'll turn. The ice truck killer twist didn't just resolve a mystery, it set the perceptual terms for the entire rest of the show. Season 2 is, in terms of sustained tension, probably the tightest the original run ever got. The premise is almost elegant in how it corners Dexter. Divers working in the waters off Miami pulled up bag after bag of dismembered remains from dozens of victims, all carefully packaged, all tied to the same location, the Bay Harbor area. The Bay Harbor Butcher, as the press named the unknown killer, had been operating for years, and now there was something tangible to work with. The FBI arrived. Sergeant James Dokes began closely observing Dexter Morgan from the very beginning. I want to spend a proper amount of time with Dokes because I think he's one of the most interesting figures in the whole original run, and he doesn't always get the recognition he deserves. Eric King plays him with this coiled, precise energy. Dokes is not a charismatic villain, not a theatrically menacing presence. He's just a very good detective who has always known on some level that something is profoundly wrong with Dexter Morgan. He can't name it, he doesn't have evidence. But the instinct is there, and it has been there since the pilot, and season 2 is the season where that instinct is finally vindicated. The thing about Dokes that the show handles honestly to its credit is that he's not a sympathetic character in the conventional sense. He's aggressive, he uses intimidation, he has his own history with violence that the show gestures toward without fully exploring. He is not a gentle soul being persecuted by a serial killer. He is a difficult, sometimes frightening man doing a legitimate job. And he is completely, entirely right about Dexter. Every suspicion he ever had was accurate. In a television universe full of antagonists who turn out to be wrong or misguided or motivated by self-interest, Dokes is simply correct. Think about that for a second. The dynamic in the Everglades cabin after Dexter overpowered Dokes and imprisoned him in a drug storage cage was some of the most interesting character work the season did. Two people separated by bars engaged in extended psychological warfare. Dokes trying to convince Dexter to turn himself in, revealing things about Harry's past that Dexter hadn't known. Dexter trying to figure out how to resolve an impossible situation, neither of them willing to look away. The scenes have a quality that's unusual for this kind of TV. They're slow and they're verbal, and they trust the audience to stay with the conversation. Then Lila arrived. Leela West is one of the more genuinely fascinating disasters the show created. She was introduced as a character who understood Dexter's darkness in a way that Rita, warm and real and grounded, couldn't quite reach. Lila had her own shadows. She didn't flinch at the things that should have made her flinch. She positioned herself as someone who saw through the performance to the person underneath, which is of course exactly what someone like Dexter would find irresistible. The problem, and it's a significant problem, is that Lila's version of understanding was not acceptance. It was identification. She didn't see Dexter clearly, she saw herself in Dexter, and she called that love. She was also, in a way that the show makes clear in retrospect, quite dangerous. Her fixation on Dexter had a quality of possession rather than affection. The way she maneuvered her way into his life, manipulated his relationship with Rita, constructed scenarios that kept her close, these were not the actions of someone who cared about Dexter's well-being. They were the actions of someone who had decided what they wanted and was willing to do whatever the situation required. There is a particular kind of horror in Lila that the show handles more cleverly than it sometimes gets credit for. She is not a killer in Dexter's sense. She doesn't have a dark passenger. She doesn't have a code. She doesn't have a methodology. What she has is a total absence of the internal limit that most people carry. She will go as far as the situation requires without the hesitation that comes from conscience. That makes her, in certain ways, more dangerous than someone like Dexter, because at least Dexter has rules. Lila's only rule is what she wants. And what she wanted in the season 2 finale was to remove the thing standing between her and Dexter. Dokes was standing there, so she removed him. What I find interesting about Lila, thinking back on the season from a distance, is that the show deployed her as a cautionary mirror for Dexter. She is what he could become, what Brian became, without the structure of the code. Someone with darkness and capability and a complete absence of restraint. The show wanted you to understand why Dexter found her compelling and also why she was wrong, and it managed both of those things reasonably well. Jamie Murray played her with a kind of beautiful instability. She was always slightly too bright, too intense, slightly over the speed limit, that made her feel genuinely unpredictable in a way the show's antagonists don't always manage. What she did in that cabin is the season's real pivot. She had found the location using Dexter's GPS. She walked in, found Dokes in the cage, and listened to him explain clearly, specifically, with evidence, exactly what Dexter Morgan was. And then she turned on the propane gas, walked outside, and ignited it. The explosion killed Dokes instantly. The investigation closed. The FBI concluded that they had found the Bay Harbor butcher in the wreckage, framed by the remains positioned next to him. James Dokes, a decorated Miami Metro sergeant with years of service, died as the man he had been trying to expose. His reputation was destroyed by the crime he had been trying to stop. The one person in the entire series who was right about Dexter was punished permanently for being right. That is, when you sit with it, genuinely bleak, not in a cheap way, in a way that has structural integrity. The show didn't reverse it. Dokes wasn't exonerated. His name stayed tarnished. And that permanent wrongness sits in the background of the rest of the series. There's a scene in season 7 where Dokes appears briefly as a vision, and it hit harder than I expected because the show hadn't let the audience forget what happened to him. Dexter killed Lila at the end of season 2. Tracked her to Paris, found her apartment, killed her. That detail is almost matter-of-fact in how the season handles it, which is probably the right approach. It would have felt strange to give Lila a dramatic finale after Dokes had received what amounted to a quiet tragedy. She was the instrument. He was the loss. There's one specific detail of the framing that I always find worth returning to. Dokes' body wasn't just found in the cabin wreckage, it was positioned specifically next to the dismembered remains of Jose Garza, in a way that made Dokes look like the butcher. That level of staging required either Lila's deliberate arrangement or an extraordinary coincidence, and the show implies the former. She didn't just kill him. Dexter framed Dokes for the murders, and Lila made sure he'd stay blamed. And almost nobody at Miami Metro questioned it seriously. Almost nobody who had worked with Dokes for years looked at the narrative and found it genuinely implausible. That tells you something either about how thoroughly people had already written Dokes off, or about how good Dexter had been, over years, at managing perceptions. Probably both. There's a broader observation worth making about Season 2's structure, which is that it's the season that most directly put pressure on the show's central premise. Season 1 was about Dexter managing the threat from the outside, an external force closing in, a mystery to be solved, an identity to conceal. Season 2 was about the architecture of Dexter's concealment itself, starting to show stress fractures. Divers found the bodies. The FBI arrived. Dokes watched him from across the office. And instead of some elegant, controlled resolution, what happened was a chain of accidents and interventions and near misses that resolved the problem through Lila's obsession rather than Dexter's competence. He outsmarted the Bay Harbor butcher investigation. Dexter survived because Lila killed Dokes after Dexter framed him. That's an interesting thing for the show to acknowledge about its own protagonist. Dexter is presented throughout as exceptionally intelligent and methodical, if not always careful, and he is all of those things. But Season 2 establishes that those qualities are not sufficient to guarantee his survival indefinitely. He needed luck. He needed Lila, and the person who paid for that luck was Dokes, who had earned nothing but the wrong outcome. I think about Dokes more than the show probably intended me to. He was not designed to be a beloved character. He was designed to be difficult and abrasive and obstructive. And yet, on reflection, he's one of the most morally clear figures in the whole run. He saw the truth, he pursued it correctly, and he was destroyed for it. That's not a comfortable legacy. But it's an honest one, and it's the one the show gave him. Season 2 reached a Rotten Tomatoes score of 96%, making it the highest rated season of the original run critically. That rating reflects something real about the season's quality, the sustained tension, the Dokes dynamic, the way the Bay Harbor butcher investigation was constructed. Even the Lila storyline, which has its critics, functions dramatically in a way that the show needed it to. Sometimes the best seasons are the ones where everything is most pressurized, and Season 2 kept the pressure on for its entire run without releasing it prematurely. Season 3 is a season the show tends to get middling reviews for, which I've always thought is a bit unfair. Not because it's as good as the season surrounding it isn't, but because what Jimmy Smits does with Miguel Prado is genuinely layered, and the central twist of that season is sadder and more emotionally precise than it usually gets credit for. The setup is almost accidental, which is part of what makes it interesting. Dexter is attempting to take down a drug dealer named Freebo, and ends up accidentally killing Oscar Prado in the process. Oscar was not the target, was in the wrong place at a bad moment, and his death set off a chain of consequences that Dexter could not have predicted. Miguel Prado, Oscar's older brother and the city's assistant district attorney, is exactly the kind of powerful, connected, grief-driven person that Dexter would normally be scrambling to avoid. Someone with resources and personal motivation and a professional obligation to find out what happened. Season 3 also had the interesting challenge of being the first season of the original run, where the primary emotional arc wasn't about an external threat to Dexter's secret. Seasons 1 and 2 were structured around people getting close to the truth. The ice truck killer knowing who Dexter was, the Bay Harbor butcher investigation threatening exposure. Season 3 tried something different. The threat wasn't exposure, the threat was intimacy. What happens when someone gets close to Dexter not to stop him but to join him? That's a more interesting question in some ways, and a riskier one dramatically, because it requires the show to make you believe in the friendship before it can break it. Jimmy Smits was cast in part because he's an actor with a very specific kind of screen warmth. Something that comes across as genuine even when the character he's playing is not genuinely warm. That quality was exactly what Season 3 needed, and it served the eventual betrayal well. What the show did instead was allow Miguel to discover Dexter's secret gradually, not through traditional detective work, but through a series of encounters that drew him into Dexter's world incrementally. And rather than the expected collapse, the exposure, the arrest, the institutional response, something stranger happened. Miguel was drawn in. He found Dexter's approach to justice not repellent, but genuinely appealing. He saw a version of order being imposed on a disordered world, and he wanted to be part of it. So began what felt, for most of the season, like Dexter's first real adult friendship. Someone who knew who he actually was, not a version, not a managed presentation, but the real thing, and wanted to be around him anyway. Someone who asked to participate not out of leverage or survival instinct, but out of what appeared to be genuine moral alignment. Miguel spoke movingly about his own history, a career built on the belief that the justice system failed people and that someone needed to compensate for that failure. It all sounded real, it sounded earned, and the show let it develop. Miguel helped Dexter cover things up. He participated in a kill under Dexter's guidance. He and Dexter developed the kind of shorthand that only comes with genuine proximity. Dexter asked him to be his best man, and he said yes. On a rewatch, that detail, the best man, the wedding, the formal acknowledgement of friendship becomes almost unbearable. The confrontation, when it came, had the quality of a cold bucket of water. Miguel had killed defense attorney Ellen Wolfe, an innocent woman who had crossed him professionally. Nothing to do with the code, nothing to do with justice or order or making the world better, just a powerful man removing an inconvenience, using Dexter's methodology as personal cover. When Dexter confronted him, Miguel dropped the warmth completely. I'll do what I want, when I want, to whomever I want. The discovery that followed made it worse. Miguel had faked Freebo's blood on his shirt at their very first real encounter, the foundational moment of the friendship. The apparent proof of shared values was staged from the beginning. He had constructed the whole relationship deliberately. From the day they met, he was working an angle. Dexter killed him. He strangled his best man and staged the body as another victim of the Skinner instead of following the same careful routine he applied to everyone else. And there's something about watching that scene, about watching Dexter go through those familiar motions with someone he had genuinely cared about, that has a different texture from the other kills in the series. It's not satisfaction. It's not even really justice. It's grief expressed in the only language Dexter reliably speaks. What this twist does that's genuinely interesting, beyond the mechanics of revelation, is reinforce a particular belief that the series keeps returning to. That genuine connection is not available to Dexter. He had believed for one season that it might be. Miguel seemed like proof that someone could see him completely and choose to stay. The discovery that Miguel had never actually seen him, had always been managing him, using him, treating the friendship as a resource, closed that door again. And the closing of it hurt in a way that the show was honest enough to let sit. Now, Season 3 also has a secondary storyline running alongside the Miguel arc that's worth briefly noting, because it changes the emotional texture of the season in ways that aren't always fully appreciated. Rita's pregnancy, the proposal, Dexter becoming, for the first time, a man building a family of his own rather than inhabiting one. The wedding preparations run as a kind of counterpoint to everything happening with Miguel, while the friendship that seemed to represent Dexter's capacity for adult connection is collapsing in the worst possible way. The domestic future is being assembled in parallel. He loses his best man and gains a wife. The season ends with a wedding, and there is something specific about the timing of that, killing Miguel and then walking down the aisle, that the show doesn't comment on directly, which is probably the right choice. It doesn't need to. The juxtaposition does the work. What I've always thought the Miguel storyline ultimately said about Dexter in the context of the whole series is something like this. The code is not the only thing that makes Dexter who he is. It's the framework Harry built to give Dexter's nature a direction and a purpose. But underneath the code is something simpler and more persistent, a need for recognition, for someone to see him completely and not turn away. Miguel offered that falsely, and Dexter believed it genuinely. The fact that he was wrong didn't make the need go away. If anything, it sharpened it, and that sharpening would shape everything that came after. I've been thinking about how to approach this section because Season 4 is the creative peak of the original series, and this moment, the final scene of the finale, is the peak of Season 4, and there's a version of talking about it that becomes numbing through overanalysis. You can go so deep into the mechanics of how it was constructed that you lose the thing that made it matter. So I want to try to stay reasonably close to what it actually felt like, while also doing justice to the craft involved. Season 4 introduced Arthur Mitchell, John Lithgow, the Trinity Killer, and Lithgow won the Emmy for this performance, Outstanding Guest Actor in a Drama Series, in 2010. Deservedly, absolutely, and without argument. Arthur Mitchell had been operating for over 3 decades, a man with a church community, a family, a charity, a career, neighbors who considered him a genuinely good person. On a cycle, a specific, rigid cycle tied to his own childhood trauma, he killed. Bathtubs, then falls, then a burial, 3 victims per cycle, then a period of quiet normalcy, then the cycle began again. The Trinity Killer was not a figure of chaos. He was a figure of horrible, methodical order. And the order was the thing that made him compelling. What drew Dexter to Arthur wasn't primarily the challenge of catching him, though that was part of it. It was the question Arthur seemed to answer. Here was a man who had held a family together all that time while living a double life. Rita was pregnant, Dexter was newly married, he had Harrison coming and the stepkids and the house in the suburbs. He wanted, badly and somewhat desperately, to believe that the 2 halves of his life were compatible, that you could be both things at once and have neither destroy the other. Arthur Mitchell was the evidence that it was possible. That reading turned out to be catastrophically wrong, and the season spent a long time revealing exactly how wrong. Because Arthur's family life wasn't proof of balance, it was proof of damage. His wife was terrorized. His children were living in controlled fear. The family Arthur had built was a performance executed through coercion, and the smiling, community-minded church volunteer was a mask over something deeply broken. Dexter was not looking at a model. He was looking at a warning. Rita herself is worth pausing on properly. She sometimes gets reduced in how people discuss the show to her function in the plot, the anchor, the normal life, the thing Dexter was protecting. That reduction undersells what Julie Benz did with the character across 4 seasons. Rita was not naive. She was a woman who had survived a genuinely difficult first marriage to a violent man, who had rebuilt herself and her children from a very difficult place, who was extending good faith to a man she loved while her instincts occasionally flagged things that didn't quite add up. She pushed back on Dexter when it mattered. She made decisions with independence and with intelligence. She was a person, not a prop. The finale, The Getaway, is structured with extraordinary care to maximize what's coming. Dexter has been hunting Arthur all season, has missed multiple chances to kill him, has made choices that in retrospect feel increasingly terrible. In the finale, he finally catches up. He gets Arthur, he kills him, it's done. He calls Rita, gets her voicemail, leaves a message telling her he's on his way and that everything is going to be all right. The season appears to be resolving in the way these things usually resolve. The threat eliminated, the family intact, life continuing. He arrives home. Rita's phone is ringing in her purse, on the floor near the door, unanswered. Harrison is crying from the direction of the bathroom. The detail about the phone sitting there, ringing in the bag of a woman who can no longer pick it up is the first moment you understand before you see anything else. And then he walks into the bathroom, Trinity's signature kill. And Harrison, an infant, sitting in a pool of his mother's blood on the floor, an exact mirror of the scene Dexter himself was found in as a child. Harry once pulled a small boy from a shipping container soaked in his mother's blood and chose to save him. Now Dexter is standing in a bathroom looking at his son in the same position, and there is nothing to save. The show doesn't do anything theatrical with this scene. There's no swelling score, no dramatic cut, no manipulation trying to engineer the emotional response. It just holds on Dexter's face and trusts the image to do what it needs to do. And it does. The cruelty of the timing is what the scene is really about in the end. Arthur had already completed his cycle before Dexter killed him. He had been to Dexter's home, he had found Rita, he had done what he always did on his cycle. And Dexter's kill came too late. One kill too late. After one season of hesitation, after one too many choices to study rather than act. The season of Dexter carrying Harrison out of that bathroom covered in his mother's blood, the echo of Harry carrying him out of a container decades before was the show announcing firmly and permanently what it was willing to do. Nothing was protected. No one was safe by virtue of being good or innocent or loved. The darkness doesn't stay contained. It spreads to the people closest to it. Let me talk about Arthur Mitchell for a moment more, because John Lithgow's performance deserves more than a passing mention in a conversation about what made Season 4 work. The specific genius of the Tri-Nighty killer as a villain is that he had genuine interiority. He wasn't just a monster performing evil, he was a damaged person whose damage had calcified into something ritualistic, something that gave his life a terrible shape. The cycle of his kills, the bathtub, the fall, the burial was not gratuitous. It was mythological, in the specific sense that it enacted and reenacted a family tragedy he couldn't stop reliving. Lithgow played all of that. He played the church choir director. He played the furious patriarch terrorizing his family in private. He played the moments where Arthur Mitchell's pain was visible even through everything he'd done with it. That's a difficult performance to give, and it made Trinity genuinely compelling in a way that the show's other antagonists, though excellent, weren't quite. He was the right villain for the season where the stakes were highest, A thing that the show does with Trinity that it doesn't always do with its antagonists. It makes you understand, if not sympathize with, how he got here. The backstory, when it arrives, is not a justification. It's a contextualization. And that distinction, the show being honest about what produced a monster without using that honesty to excuse the monster, is part of what made Season 4 the critical high-water mark it remains. A thing worth noting about Season 4 specifically, because I find myself thinking about it on rewatches. Michael C. Hall filmed the entire season while undergoing treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was in chemotherapy during production, and the show worked around it. Wardrobe, lighting, camera angles, and most people watching at the time had no idea. He's spoken about it since in interviews, with a kind of matter-of-fact candor. The performance he gave is extraordinary on its own terms, as pure craft. Knowing the context makes it something else entirely. He was playing a man confronting his own darkness and mortality, while actually confronting his own mortality, and it shows in a way I find very difficult to articulate but very easy to feel. Since we're on the topic of what Season 4 cost and what it took, it's worth spending a moment on what the Rita storyline was doing across the whole of its 4-season run. Because Rita's death is sometimes discussed as if it were primarily a plot device, the thing that happened to move Dexter's story forward into Season 5. And while that's mechanically true, it undersells what the show had built with that relationship over the previous 3 seasons. Rita represented something specific and irreplaceable in Dexter's world, and it wasn't simply domesticity or cover or normalcy, though she provided all of those things. She represented the possibility that a version of Dexter that deserved good things could exist. She had watched him be patient with her children and gentle with her history, and present in the way that a person who cares about someone is present. She didn't know what he was, but she knew that he was trying, and she respected and loved the trying. In a story about a man who is largely convinced of his own incapacity for genuine human connection, Rita was the evidence against that conviction, not proof of redemption, just evidence of capacity. Destroying her wasn't just devastating because she was a character the audience had come to care about across 4 years. It was devastating because it destroyed the evidence. After Rita, the argument that Dexter could have something good becomes much harder to make, and the show knew it. That's precisely why the choice had the weight it did. The show was burning down its own argument. The Season 4 finale was directed by Steve Schill, who won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing in a Drama Series for this episode. That is correct and appropriate. The Getaway is an extraordinarily controlled piece of direction. The episode builds with something close to false comfort, the resolution of the Trinity arc, the relief of the kill, the message left on the voicemail, and then dismantles that comfort with a sequence that refuses to sensationalize what it's showing. There's a real restraint in how the final scene is filmed. Less is more, and Schill understood that completely. Season 5 is a quietly underrated season. It came directly after Season 4, which is an almost impossible position to be in. You've just done the most devastating thing you could possibly do to the audience, and now you have to figure out what the show is in the aftermath of that. The temptation in that situation would have been to move too quickly, to rush Dexter through grief and back towards something functional. Season 5, to its credit, didn't do that. It sat in the wreckage for a while before introducing the thing that would pull Dexter back. That thing was Lumen Pierce, Julia Stiles. And it's a performance that got a Golden Globe nomination and deserved it, because Stiles was doing something genuinely difficult, playing a character who was both a victim and an agent, both being shaped by Dexter's world and actively choosing it, in a way that never felt passive or convenient. Lumen had survived the Barrel Girl ring, a group of wealthy, connected men who had operated with near impunity, kidnapping women, subjecting them to extended abuse, and in most cases, killing them afterward. Lumen had survived when others hadn't. She had escaped. She was in Miami, unraveling, in possession of specific information about specific people, and a need to do something about it that she couldn't name or contain. What developed between her and Dexter was not a conventional romance, even when it became romantic. It was a recognition. Lumen saw what Dexter was, not as something to be afraid of, and not as something to manage, but as something that could be useful in the service of a specific and legitimate need. She wasn't falling for a fantasy. She was making a practical, clear-eyed decision to work with a person who had capabilities she needed. And Dexter, for the first time, was working with someone who knew everything and hadn't run. There's something structurally important about what Lumen represented in the context of the whole series up to that point. Every time someone had gotten close to knowing Harry, Brian, Dokes, the result had been death or tragedy. The knowledge of what Dexter was seemed to function as a kind of curse. Lumen broke the pattern. She knew and she stayed. Not because she was naive or manipulated, but because she made a choice with full information, and the choice was yes. A detail from season 5 that I've always thought was genuinely moving, and that sometimes gets passed over. Deb got close. Deborah was investigating the vigilante killings connected to the Barrel Girl ring, and she was good at her job, and she assembled the evidence carefully and got close enough that at one point she essentially had them cornered. She saw them, their silhouettes in the dark, the shape of two people who had done violent things to violent people. And she let them go. She didn't know it was her brother. She just saw what was there and made a choice about what justice meant in that specific situation. The fact that Deb's mercy extended unknowingly to her own brother, in a season built entirely around grief and damage and survival, is the kind of structural coincidence that good television earns rather than imposes. And there's something interesting about comparing Deb's choice in season 5, letting the vigilantes go, not knowing who they were, with her choice in season 6's finale, when she did know. In season 5, she extended mercy to strangers she sensed were D. In season 7, she extended complicity to her own brother, a man she loved, knowing exactly what he had done. She loved knowing exactly what he had done. The mercy was easier in some ways in season 5. It cost her less. In season 6, it cost her everything. But both choices came from the same place in Deb, a sense that justice is not always identical to law, that the right thing and the procedurally correct thing are not always the same, and that love, in whatever form it takes, sometimes overrides both. And then, when the last name on the list was gone, when Jordan Chase was dead and the ring was fully dismantled, Lumen discovered something. The darkness had lifted. The need that had been driving her since her escape, that wound that required doing something about, was gone. She wasn't the same person she had been when she arrived in Miami. She had changed, and the change pointed away from Dexter's world rather than deeper into it. She told him tearfully that she needed to go. Not because of anything he had done wrong, not because she had turned on him or been frightened by him or decided he was too much to be around. Because she was healing, and healing meant leaving. She was no longer broken in the way that had made her part of this, and he wasn't going to stop being broken. The gap between them was her recovery, and it was unbridgeable. Dexter threw plates. That detail, the methodical, contained man who plans everything, suddenly doing something completely without calculation, something that didn't serve any purpose except to express what he felt, has always stayed with me. He accepted it, promised to carry her darkness along with his own, and they held each other one last time. What this twist does that's different from most of the others in the series is that it declines the obvious option. The obvious narrative choice, the one the season spent considerable time setting up, was that Lumen would stay, that Dexter had finally found his post-Rita future. The show said no, and did so in a way that had complete internal integrity. She didn't leave because she was taken from him or because she turned against him. She left because she got better. That's both beautiful and quite sad, and the show was honest enough to let it be both simultaneously. There's a thing about Season 5 as a whole that I want to name before we move on, because it tends to get lost in discussions of the larger arc. Season 5 is, in some ways, the gentlest season the show produced. That sounds like a strange thing to say about a season involving the aftermath of brutal murder and a vigilante hunting ring. But the emotional tone of it, particularly in the Dexter-Lumen relationship, has a warmth and quietness to it that the show doesn't often allow itself. They cook together, they talk in the evenings, they help each other carry things that are too heavy to carry alone. It's tender in its specific and unusual way. And I think the departure lands as hard as it does partly because of that tenderness, because the show gave you something genuinely warm and then let it end in the most honest, non-dramatic way possible. Most television relationships end in death or betrayal. This one ended in healing. The show trusted that a relationship ending because one person recovered was as emotionally significant as a relationship ending in violence. I think it was right to trust that. I think it paid off. The other thing worth saying about Lumen's departure in the context of the series as a whole is that it represents Dexter at his most graceful. He accepted it. He didn't try to hold her. He didn't argue or manipulate or find a way to make her feel that leaving was wrong. He made a promise to carry her darkness with his, and he let her go. For a character defined by control and management and careful architecture, that grace is noteworthy and maybe worth something. Season 6 has two distinct twists, and they are very different from each other in terms of weight and consequence. The first one is, I think, the weaker of the two, interesting in concept, somewhat under-earned in execution. The second one is the most consequential single thing that happens in the entire original series. Let's do both. The Doomsday Killer arc in Season 6 centers on Travis Marshall, played by Colin Hanks, who is staging elaborate murders based on imagery from the Book of Revelation. He's constructing tableau after tableau, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the horror of Babylon, with a commitment to the source material that is, in its way, kind of impressive, even as it's obviously awful. And alongside Travis, apparently directing the whole enterprise, is Professor James Geller, played by Edward James Olmos. Geller is presented as the mastermind, the older, more experienced theological scholar who is guiding Travis through the eschatological vision, the one with the intellectual framework for what they're building. The show spends most of its sixth season cutting between Travis and Geller, interacting as two separate, physically present people, having conversations, making plans, sharing space. And then the reveal. Geller has been dead since before the season began. Travis killed him. The Geller that the audience has been watching all season is Travis's hallucination, a projection of his own beliefs and psychology given the face and voice of a mentor, functioning as a dark passenger in the same way that Dexter's internal Harry does. It's a structurally reasonable idea, and the parallel to Dexter's own inner life was clearly deliberate. Edward James Olmos is interesting to watch throughout, but the twist doesn't land with the same satisfaction as the Brian Moser reveal from Season 1. Partly because the show didn't quite hide it the same way. The clues feel more retroactively convenient than genuinely embedded. There are moments across the season that, in hindsight, should have flagged what was happening, but they don't flag it in a way that rewards careful watching. They just feel like oversights you're supposed to forgive once you know the answer. It's the lesser of the two twists, worth mentioning, worth sitting with briefly, and then we move on. Now, a brief word about Season 6 as a context for the church scene, because I think it's relevant. Season 6 is the first season of what became known as the Scott Buck era, the 3-season stretch after Clyde Phillips left following Season 4. The show was visibly finding its new identity, and not always successfully. The Geller storyline was ambitious but uneven. The religious imagery was sometimes striking and sometimes labored. Season 6 has a Rotten Tomatoes score that reflects the critical unease with where the show was going. But within all of that, the final scene of the finale is one of the best things the entire original series produced. And that asymmetry, a struggling season ending on a moment of genuine power, is, in its way, interesting. It suggests the show still knew what its best instincts were, even when it wasn't always following them. Because the second thing, the church thing, that's the one that matters. Deborah had been in therapy all season, working through accumulated difficulty, and her therapist had helped her arrive at a conclusion she spent most of the season not knowing what to do with. She had feelings for Dexter that went beyond what siblings normally have. It's a storyline the show handles with varying degrees of comfort across season 6 and into season 7. The framing is sometimes awkward, the execution uneven, but the emotional core of it, stripped of the more uncomfortable elements, is real. Deb's relationship with Dexter is the central relationship of her life, the one everything else organizes around. And that relationship is not entirely explicable in simple terms. She decided to tell him. She'd been working up to it. She would find him at the Santa Maria de Loreto church, where he'd agreed to do a final forensic sweep, and she would say the things she had been trying to say all season. She gathered the courage, and she went. What she walked into was Dexter, standing over Travis Marshall's body with a knife raised high in the middle of a fully assembled kill room. Plastic sheeting on the walls, a table, his kit, the whole architecture of his secret life fully visible in a church. She stood in the doorway and watched her brother plunge the knife in. Time went somewhere strange after that. Neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time, and then Dexter turned and saw her and said very quietly, "Oh God," that line rating. That specific, quiet, sinking, "oh God," not sharp, not panicked, not the voice of someone surprised, but the voice of someone watching an inevitable thing arrive, and accepting that it has arrived is one of Michael C. Hall's finest moments in the whole run, all of it in 2 words. Years of secrecy, all of the architecture of management and distance and careful performance, collapsing in one moment. And then Deb made the choice that everything else in the series, seasons 7 and 8, New Blood to some extent, is built on. She helped him destroy the evidence. She stood in that church while it burned, and she made herself complicit. The woman who had spent her entire career building an identity around doing the right thing, who had survived things that would have broken most people and come out on the other side still trying, who was genuinely good at a job that was fundamentally about justice, that woman burned a crime scene to protect her brother. And in doing so, she changed the terms of who she was. Everything that follows flows from that doorway. Every terrible decision Deborah makes in the back half of the series has its origin in the moment she saw what she saw and chose not to call it in. But I want to linger here a bit, because the church scene is often discussed in terms of what Deb saw, and I think the more interesting conversation is about what she chose. She didn't run, she didn't scream, she stood there and watched, and then she stayed. And the choice to stay, to not immediately treat what she witnessed as a crime requiring a response, but to let the shock settle into something else, something that looked more like decision, is not a passive thing. It is, in its way, the most decisive thing Debrew Morgan does in the entire series. More decisive than shooting La Guerre, because shooting La Guerre, when it comes, is a decision made in a fraction of a second under unbearable pressure. Standing in that church and choosing deliberately to help burn the evidence is a decision made with a little more room to think, and she made it anyway. What season 6 set up and season 7 had to reckon with is the question of whether love of this specific quality, love that can survive watching someone do what Deborah watched Dexter do, is something to be admired or something to be frightened of. The show doesn't give you a clean answer. It's honest about the fact that Deb's love for Dexter is real and deep and earned, and that love of this depth can lead people to do things that would otherwise be unthinkable. That's not a comfortable truth, but it's a true one. I've always thought that Jennifer Carpenter's performance across the back half of the series, season 7 in particular, is one of the more underrated extended pieces of work in the franchise. She was playing a character in genuine moral collapse, slowly, with grief rather than melodrama, and she did it without the show giving her the kind of showcase material that traditionally gets recognized. No single big scene, just a sustained, quiet deterioration, episode by episode. That's harder to do than people realize, and it's rarely the thing that gets the award nominations. Season 7 is, in structure, about the aftermath of the church. It's about what happens to two people, Dexter and Deb, when the secret between them can no longer be managed through distance. Deb now knows everything. And the season asked a very specific and uncomfortable question in response to that. Now that she knows, what does she do about it? The answer it gave was that she tried for a long time to hold two incompatible things simultaneously. She loved Dexter with the specific depth and dependency of someone for whom that relationship has been the center of their adult life. And she knew what Dexter was with the specific clarity of someone who had just watched him kill a man in a church with her own eyes. She attempted to occupy both of those realities at once. It didn't work. It was never going to work. But watching her try was one of Jennifer Carpenter's finest extended performances, and it doesn't get discussed as often as it should. The season's central threat wasn't a new serial killer, it was Captain Mario Laguerto. And before we get to what happens, I want to say something about Laguerto because her arc in season 7 is one of the more interesting things the show did in its back half. Laguerto spent the majority of the series being, to put it diplomatically, difficult. She was politically motivated, sometimes obstructive, occasionally prepared to bend institutional processes in ways that served her career. She was not a fan favorite. She was the speed bump, the bureaucratic obstacle, the person who made Deb's professional life harder for reasons that seemed to have more to do with ego than principle. And then season 7 happened, and Laguerto became, against all expectations and without any cheap redemption arc to get her there, the most morally correct person in the room. She had never believed that James Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. She had known Dokes too well. She had access to her own judgment of him as a person and a colleague, and that judgment told her the evidence was wrong, even when it officially closed the case. She reopened the investigation, she pulled phone records, connected Dexter and Deborah to the church fire from season 6, built her case methodically. She was doing her job, she was doing it well, and she was going to get there. That's the specific quality of what Laguerto represented in season 7. Not malice, not obsession, not a personal vendetta, just competence applied to a problem no one else was willing to look at seriously. She was the institutional response finally working the way institutional responses are supposed to. The final confrontation was in a shipping container on New Year's Eve. The show chose that location deliberately. A shipping container is where Dexter's story began. His mother died in one, he was found in one. And in one, Laguerto woke up and made her final appeal to Deborah. She asked her to do the right thing, to arrest Dexter, to stop this before it consumed anyone else. Deb stood there with 2 guns in the room. Dexter had been preparing to cross his own code and kill Laguerto himself, which would have been its own kind of catastrophe, and made a choice in a fraction of a second that she could not undo. She raised the gun, and she shot Laguerta. Let me talk about what was happening in that room for all 3 people present, because I think it's worth unpacking slowly. Dexter was there to kill Laguerto, which would have been the first time he had killed someone who genuinely didn't meet the code's criteria, someone who was doing the right thing and simply had the bad luck of being right about him. He had been building himself toward it and finding himself unable. That resistance is one of the more interesting things about Dexter in season 7. The code wasn't just a strategic convenience, it was the thing that separated him, in his own accounting, from people like Brian and Lila. Breaking it would have meant something. So he hesitated, and Deb stepped in, not because she had lost her moral sense entirely, but because in a fraction of a second, with Laguertu looking at her and asking her to choose, she chose family. She chose her brother, the person whose absence would be, in her estimate, an absence she couldn't survive. That's not a moral argument, it's a human one. And the show was honest enough to show that human arguments can lead people somewhere terrible. The scene after, Deb on the floor next to the body, her dress, the new year, the absolute wreckage of everything, was one of the most quietly devastating in the whole series. And then they went to Angel's party. That detail, the two of them arriving at a New Year's Eve party shortly after this, is the kind of thing that sounds almost farcical in description, but works completely in execution, because it's genuinely what people in shock sometimes do. They hold on to the structure of an ordinary evening because there's nothing else to hold on to. There's a reflection Dexter has after this. Once you break your own rules, you're never the same. He was right, and he was right specifically about Deb. Season 8 shows us exactly what that looks like. She leaves the force, she self-medicates, she distances herself from the person she spent her career being, and then from most of the people she cared about, and then from the ability to care about much at all. Killing Laguertu didn't just change her life, it dismantled it from the inside. Laguertu was right, that's the final word on her, and it's worth saying plainly. She was right about Dokes, she was right about Dexter. She spent years being the institutional obstacle, and then she spent one season being the only person doing the right thing. She died for it. The Bay Harbor Butcher case closed permanently, with the correct man still free and the correct woman dead. Now, I want to say something about what the Deb shoots Laguertu moment does to the architecture of the whole show, because I think it gets discussed mostly in terms of its immediate drama and not enough in terms of what it means structurally. Up to this point, the pattern of the series has been Dexter is endangered, Dexter resolves the danger, usually through some form of violence or manipulation, and life continues. He is the active agent. Other characters are moved around him. Season 7's finale broke that pattern almost completely. Dexter didn't resolve the Laguertu threat. Deb did, and she did it in a way that cost her everything while protecting someone who, from a certain perspective, didn't fully deserve protecting. That shift in agency is significant. It changed the power dynamic between the characters in a way that Season 8 had to address, and mostly didn't. Because after that shipping container, Dexter owes Deb a debt that he cannot repay and probably cannot even fully acknowledge. She gave up her moral identity to protect him. And he watched her do it and accepted it and kept going. That's not a small thing. And the show, to its credit, did show us the cost, showed us Deb coming apart in Season 8, showed us the drugs and the leaving the force and the distance, even if the season didn't fully understand what to do with all of that. The shipping container setting was clearly deliberate. The show chose that location specifically. Everything important in Dexter Morgan's story began in a shipping container. His mother's death, his origin, the trauma that made him what he is. And the moment that sealed Deborah's moral fate happened in a shipping container. Whether that's meaningful or just atmospherically convenient, I've never fully decided, but I don't think it was accidental. Season 8 is the most controversial season of the original series, and the ending is the most controversial part of it. I want to be honest about my own response to it and also try to be fair to what it was attempting, because I think the conversation around Season 8 sometimes collapses into pure contempt in a way that forecloses anything interesting. The season started with something genuinely rich. The arrival of Dr. Evelyn Vogel, played by Charlotte Rampling, who revealed that she had worked with Harry in designing the code. Not Harry's improvised response to a unique and difficult child, but a clinical framework developed with a neuropsychiatrist who had spent her career studying psychopathy. and decided that the ethical response to a child like Dexter was management rather than treatment. It reframed everything. The code wasn't just Harry's love, expressed in the only way he knew how. It was a therapeutic program designed by someone who was thinking clinically about outcomes. Vogel is one of the more interesting secondary characters in the back half of the series, partly because she complicates the mythology in a productive way. She has a proprietary relationship with Dexter, not maternal exactly, but something in that territory, the feeling of a scientist who has observed her experiment for years and arrived to see how it turned out. There's something unsettling about that framing that the show uses well. Is Dexter's whole life a project? Is the code something he owns or something that was imposed on him, tested by someone, evaluated against criteria he wasn't consulted on? Vogel doesn't answer those questions cleanly. She raises them, and then the season moves forward before they're fully resolved. Vogel's relationship with Dexter had a warmth to it that the season handled carefully. She became something close to the maternal figure he had never had, the person who knew the full truth of his origin, including parts Harry had never told him, and didn't flinch. Her death, when it came, at the hands of the brain surgeon, her own son, which was its own kind of terrible, was one of the season's more effective moments. But the season's real emotional through line was the Argentina plan. Hannah McKay had returned, and the plan was building. Fake identities, travel arrangements, a new life in a country where no one knew their names. Harrison was going with them. Dexter was closer to a version of the future he had always told himself he didn't deserve than he had ever been, and the season spent considerable time making that plan feel real and possible. And then Oliver Saxon shot Deborah. She survived the shooting. She was in surgery, and the surgery went well, and there was every reason to believe she would recover. Dexter killed Saxon in custody, which had its own consequences, but the season was moving towards something. And then Deb had a stroke, massive neurological damage. Brain dead. He went to the hospital and found his sister on life support, and the season's emotional arithmetic changed completely. What Dexter did next, disconnecting her from the machines, carrying her body out to sea, performing for her the same ritual of private burial he had performed for his victims for years, is one of the more quietly devastating scenes the series produced. It's an act of love expressed in the only language Dexter has ever reliably spoken. And then he steered his own boat into the approaching hurricane. The intention was self-sacrifice by disappearance. He was removing himself from the equation, from Hannah's life, from Harrison's proximity, from the pattern of everyone close to him ending up consumed by proximity. He'd watched it happen too many times. He was acting on the calculation rather than surviving the aftermath again. He survived, and the final scene of the series showed him alive and bearded in the Pacific Northwest, working as a lumberjack, looking into the camera with an expression that was very hard to read. I remember watching that scene for the first time and not knowing what face to make. Not angry exactly, not satisfied. Something closer to the feeling you get when a long conversation ends without anyone saying what they actually meant. The show had been building toward something, and it delivered something else. Not nothing, but not the thing the build deserved. And the beard and the wood chopping and the direct-to-camera stare were somehow both too much and not enough simultaneously. I've talked to a lot of people who felt something similar. The ending wasn't incompetent, it was just incomplete. And the distinction matters. The show had spent 8 seasons building towards some kind of reckoning, some answer to the question it had been asking about whether Dexter's darkness would ultimately destroy him or whether peace of any kind was available to him. And the answer it gave was, he goes to Oregon. He's fine. He's just in the woods now. That's not a resolution. It's a pause. And that, in hindsight, was exactly what it was meant to be. Because new blood was the plan, even if it took until 2021 to materialize. The lumberjack ending was a door left open rather than a conclusion. which doesn't entirely excuse it as a season finale. You can't fully redeem an unsatisfying ending by gesturing at the sequel it was planning, but it does give it a context that the pure contempt response sometimes forgets. What I find interesting about the Season 8 finale, sitting with it now knowing how New Blood resolved things, is that it's not entirely wrong about Dexter. The decision to remove himself, to stage his disappearance, to protect Hannah and Harrison from continued proximity to the damage he causes, is the right instinct. The problem is that the show presented it as a kind of peace, when what it actually was avoidance. Dexter didn't resolve anything by going to Oregon. He just put it in a drawer. And the drawer opened 10 years later when Harrison came and found him. That's not resolution. That's postponement. But postponement in this story turned out to be valuable because what happened when the drawer opened was the ending the story actually needed. There's also something worth saying about Deborah's death in Season 8 specifically. She died from complications after being shot, a stroke, irreversible brain damage, life support, Dexter's final act as her brother. And the show presents that death largely as something that happened to Dexter, a grief event that catalyzes his final decisions. But Deborah's death is also, when you think about it, the direct consequence of her own moral collapse from Season 7. She killed La Guertu. She destroyed herself doing it. Season 8 showed that destruction progressing to its endpoint. The bullet that killed her was Saxon's, but the path to that ending was paved much earlier in a shipping container on New Year's Eve. New Blood is, in my view, the ending this story deserved. I want to say that clearly at the outset before getting into it, because I think the way I feel about the New Blood finale is shaped significantly by how I felt about the original one. If you found the original Season 8 finale satisfying, New Blood might feel like an unnecessary correction. If you found it frustrating, and I did, New Blood feels like the show finally being honest about what this story was always going to have to become. The setup, a decade after the hurricane, Dexter is living in Iron Lake, New York, under the name Jim Lindsay. It's a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place that runs on community and proximity, where everyone knows everyone's name, and the rhythms of life are slow enough that you notice when something breaks them. He has a job at a sporting goods store, a relationship with Njulu Bishop, the town's police chief, almost 10 years without a kill. The dark passenger suppressed through routine and distance and sheer force of will. The white deer is a recurring image in New Blood, and it's worth mentioning here because it's one of the season's more deliberate visual choices. Dexter has been watching a white deer in the woods near Iron Lake, and his feelings about it, the purity of it, the stillness, the sense of something rare and unbothered, are coded as his feelings about the version of himself he's been trying to maintain. The man who doesn't kill, the man who might be safe to be around, the man his son, when he eventually arrives, could possibly have a relationship with. Harrison finds him. Harrison Morgan, now a teenager, carrying damage that the season makes visually and verbally clear from his first scene. The childhood in foster care, the years without a father, separated from everyone and everything he had known, the violence he has started to find in himself that he doesn't understand and doesn't know what to do with. He arrived at Dexter's cabin and left after Dexter told him he had the wrong man, and Dexter, who had spent a decade telling himself that the best thing he ever did was disappear, had to look at what that decision had actually produced. The dynamic between Dexter and Harrison in New Blood is fascinating precisely because both of them are trying to help each other and failing to do it honestly. Dexter wants to be a father without disclosing the full truth. Harrison wants to understand his own darkness without having to understand where it came from. Every conversation they have is circling the thing neither of them will name directly, and the season is patient enough to let that circling go on long enough that the inevitable confrontation carries genuine weight. There's a particular scene from mid-season that I keep coming back to. Harrison, having started wrestling and discovering a controlled outlet for his aggression, intentionally breaks the arm of his opponent after the opponent taps out. He wins the match, but he wins it wrong. He kept going after the fight was over in a way that crossed a line. And Dexter, watching from the stands, sees it. Sees exactly what it means. The dark passenger has a son. And Dexter's immediate response is to want to pretend he didn't see it. To tell Harrison that was great, it's fine, let's go home. The habit of concealment runs so deep it applies even to the truth about his own child. That dynamic, Dexter trying to protect Harrison from knowledge of himself, and Harrison already knowing more than Dexter thinks, runs through the whole season and makes every conversation between them carry more weight than the words in it. Most of Dexter's murder tools were visible in the church. That's a difficult thing to communicate without overplaying it, and he got it right. Kurt Caldwell, the town patriarch, played by Clancy Brown with considerable warmth in the early episodes, is the season's villain. The show was clearly aware it was building another Trinity parallel, the respected community figure with a terrible secret. A man whose public face is generosity and belonging, whose private reality involves a room underground where he keeps trophies. Clancy Brown is good enough at warmth that the reveal, when the season gets to it, still works even when you can see it coming. But the season's real structural twist isn't Kurt Caldwell, it's Angela. Angela Bishop had been conducting a slow, methodical investigation that began with a missing woman and kept expanding. She was good at her job and she was persistent, and the evidence kept pointing in a direction that piece by piece she had to follow. A bone screw from Matt Caldwell's body, a connection to the Bay Harbor Butcher archives, Jim Lindsay's fingerprints matching Dexter Morgan's, the man she had been in a relationship with, the man she trusted, the man she had let into her life and her daughter's life, not who he said he was, and something considerably more dangerous than she'd understood. Dexter gets arrested, Logan brings him in, and in his cell, Dexter kills Logan, Sergeant Logan, by any measure a decent man doing his job, not a predator or a monster by any measure that Dexter's code would recognize, because Logan was between him and the door. Harrison knows what that means immediately. He had been building a version of his father that could accommodate the dark passenger, that could accept, if not endorse, a man who only killed bad people, who had a code, who was working by rules even if the rules were not the ones anyone else would choose. Logan wasn't a bad person, Logan was just in the way. The code was negotiable when self-preservation required it, and Harrison now knew that completely and finally. The confrontation in the woods, Dexter running through the snow, covered in blood that wasn't his, to the spot where the white deer had been killed earlier in the season, is built slowly and deliberately, Harrison loading the rifle. The question he asks his father, quietly and directly, would Rita and Deb be alive if it weren't for him? The show doesn't deflect from the answer. Dexter doesn't manage his way around it. The flashbacks come: Logan, LaGuertu, Dokes, Lundy, Harry, Rita, Deborah, not presented as accusations but as acknowledgments. Yes, this is the list. These are the people proximity to me has cost. He tells Harrison to take the safety off. He says it's the only way out, the only way the cycle stops. He tells his son to shoot him in the heart. Harrison pulls the trigger. Dexter's last words, "You did good," are, I think, the most Dexter line he ever delivers. Not "I love you." Not "I'm sorry." A quiet assessment. His son had done the right thing by the code that Harry built, the code that Vogel designed, the code that Dexter had been trying to pass down in some form to his own child. It had finally been turned on its creator, and Dexter approved. There's a circular horror to it that takes a while to sit with fully. Angela's choice afterward is one of the season's most quietly considered decisions. She arrives at the scene and finds Harrison standing over his father's body, and she has every legitimate reason to arrest him. She chose instead to let him go. She wiped down the rifle, pressed money into his hands, told him to leave and never come back. She closed the chapter herself. Whether that's justice or mercy or both or neither, I genuinely haven't decided. Harrison drives out of Iron Lake through the snow. He passes Audrey's house and sees her in the window. He doesn't stop. The letter to Hannah plays in voiceover, and Dexter Morgan, who survived a shipping container at 4 years old, who built a life out of controlled darkness, who tried and failed and tried again to be something that wouldn't destroy the people around him, is dead in the snow. That, I think, is the correct ending. Not because it's satisfying in a comfortable way, it isn't. Not because it's redemptive by any conventional measure, I'm not entirely sure it is. But because it's internally honest. The cycle that began with Laura Moser's blood in a shipping container ended with Dexter's blood in the snow of Iron Lake, and the person who fired the shot was the child he had tried hardest to protect from it. That's not a happy ending, but it's a truthful one, and sometimes that's the better of the two. And there's something worth sitting with in Dexter's final choice that I don't think gets discussed enough. He didn't just accept the gun, he directed it. He told Harrison to take the safety off. He told his son how to fire the shot. In his last act as a father, Dexter turned himself into a willing subject of the code he had spent his life following. He became the guilty party who fit the criteria, someone who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, who had taken people who shouldn't have been taken. He applied the code to himself, and in doing so, he gave Harrison the only gift he had left to give, the ability to end it cleanly with the conviction that it was right. I don't know that I'd call that redemption, but I'd call it something, a kind of moral completion maybe, the code coming full circle. A brief note on the New Blood production itself because it's relevant to appreciating what the season achieved. It was filmed during strict COVID-19 protocols in the village of Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, which stood in for Iron Lake. The logistical challenge of producing an ensemble drama in winter conditions under pandemic restrictions and producing it with the quality and coherence it achieved is genuinely impressive. The cold is real in those frames, the landscape is doing real work, and the choice to set the story in that specific kind of small-town isolation where everyone knows everything and secrets have nowhere to hide was the right one. The show needed Dexter trapped by community rather than lost in the anonymity of a city, and New Blood understood that. Original Sin is the most recent piece of the franchise we're covering tonight. It arrived in late 2024, set in 1991 Miami, and I think it might be the most underappreciated entry in the whole franchise. It did something the series had never quite attempted. It showed us the beginning in real time, not in flashback. Not Dexter as a child in brief cutaways with an adult narrator explaining what the code meant in retrospect. Dexter as a young adult at the start of everything while Harry was still figuring out what to do about him. Patrick Gibson plays young Dexter, and he's excellent in the role. The specific quality of stillness he brings, that particular way of being present in a scene while simultaneously somewhere else entirely, is clearly studied from Michael C. Hall. But it doesn't feel like imitation. It feels like a different person carrying the same underlying condition. And Michael C. Hall himself narrates, providing the adult Dexter's inner voice over his younger self's story, which is a production choice that works beautifully. You hear the man the boy becomes, commenting on who the boy still was. Christian Slater plays Harry, and that casting is its own kind of inspired. Slater has always had a particular quality, a warmth with a slight edge underneath it, a charm that you trust while slightly monitoring, that fits Harry Morgan precisely. This is not the wise, composed Harry of the original series flashbacks. This is Harry improvising, under pressure, with no map for what he's dealing with. The season follows Dexter's forensics internship at Miami Metro, where he meets younger versions of characters we know. Laguertu, Batistu, glimpses of the institutional world that will eventually become his cover story. It's pleasingly detailed about that world, about the texture of Miami Metro in 1991, and the show uses the familiarity of those faces as a kind of dramatic irony. We know where all of these people are going to end up, and the season knows we know. The code across original sin is not a finished document. It's a conversation. Harry has principles, instincts, a strong sense of what justice should mean, and a son who is capable of violence that Harry cannot contain through discipline alone. So he shapes it, he redirects, he improvises a framework that channels what's already there towards something he can live with morally. And the season shows him doing that in real time, which changes your relationship to every version of Harry's guidance you've seen in the original series. The first sanctioned kill is Nurse Mary. She had been working at the hospital where Harry was recovering from a heart attack, and Dexter, in visiting him, had noticed something wrong about her. Her behavior, specific and off in ways he could articulate clearly even if no one else was paying enough attention to see them. The newspaper clippings, the pattern, she was poisoning patients. Harry, from his bed, gave Dexter permission. What followed is one of the most quietly unsettling scenes Original Sin produced. Dexter kills Nurse Mary, disposes of the body, and comes home. Harry asks how it went, and Dexter tells him simply and completely honestly that it felt good. Not complicated, not morally weighted, not something he needed to work through or justify. Good. Harry, sitting there in the specific knowledge of what he has participated in, what he has enabled, what he has blessed, what he has shaped, barely holds himself together. The scene doesn't hold on Harry's response for long because it doesn't need to. But the image of it is exactly right. A father realizing in a moment of terrible clarity that the thing he thought he was saving has become something he doesn't entirely recognize as having been saved. That scene does something to every version of Harry's guidance you've seen in the original series. Because the Harry of the original series has largely been processed as wisdom, the voice of the code, the moral compass, the man whose framework kept Dexter functional and relatively contained for 20+ years. Original Sin shows you the man who made the framework, and he's frightened. He's not wise. He's a detective who loved a woman he shouldn't have loved, who found her children in a shipping container, who adopted one of them out of guilt or love or both, and who is now sitting in a hospital room with the understanding that his intervention produced something he doesn't fully know how to account for. I find that image, Harry sitting there while Dexter tells him killing felt good, one of the most quietly devastating in the whole franchise. More than the bathtub scene in some ways, because at least the bathtub scene was done to Dexter. This was done by him and by Harry together. The earrings are a small but telling detail. Harry told Dexter not to take trophies. Dexter took Mary's earrings and kept them, a small and almost casual act of defiance. It foreshadows in miniature the entire relationship between the code and Dexter's actual impulses for the rest of the franchise. The code was never the perfect governing architecture it appeared to be in the original series flashbacks. It was always a negotiation, and Dexter was always quietly negotiating the terms. The season ends with Brian Moser watching the Morgan family from the outside, standing in the dark, watching through a window. He's not part of the story yet, won't be until season 1 of the original series. But he's already there. The shadow of the future already present in 1991, the beginning of the ending visible from the very start. That's exactly the kind of structural choice that makes you want to go back through everything again. There's a thing Original Sin does as a whole that I think is its most valuable contribution to the franchise. It makes Harry sympathetic without making him innocent. The original series Harry in his flashback form is largely a figure of moral authority, the man who loved Dexter enough to accept him as he was and build a framework to protect him from himself and others. He's treated mostly as right. Original Sin complicates that. The Harry of 1991 is a man doing his best in an impossible situation, frequently uncertain, occasionally wrong, and genuinely frightened by what he has brought into his home. He's not wise, he's improvising, and the code is not a finished moral system handed down from a position of confidence. It's a construction in progress, built from guesswork and love and desperation. I find that version of Harry more interesting than the wise mentor version the original series gave us, and also considerably sadder. The show was canceled before a second season could air, which is genuinely unfortunate. There, the show was renewed for a second season, which is genuinely unfortunate. And the relationships were well established and the cancellation felt premature. The announcement of cancellation in August 2025 came despite an earlier renewal that had seemed to confirm a second season was coming. The reversal was the kind of industry decision that's hard to fully explain from the outside. But what Original Sin produced in its single season is worth revisiting if you haven't already. It's a carefully made piece of television that does what the best prequels do. It makes you see the original differently, and that's not a small achievement. There's a particular scene from Original Sin that I keep coming back to, and it involves Deborah rather than Dexter. Young Deb, played by Molly Brown, who captures Jennifer Carpenter's specific energy without simply imitating her, feeling consistently like the spare part in the Morgan household. Harry and Dexter have their private language, their shared secret, their bond built on something she's not allowed into. She doesn't know what it is, she just knows it exists and she's on the outside of it. That feeling of being the sibling left out of the room where the real conversation is happening is something Original Sin traces carefully throughout its single season. And watching it, knowing what Deb eventually discovers, gives those scenes a specific melancholy that the show earns. And that, more or less, is where we've been tonight. 8 seasons of the original series, plus New Blood, and a slower look at Original Sin. All those moments where the show stopped what it was doing, turned, and quietly dismantled what you thought you understood. Brian Moser in a freezer full of severed limbs and a dismembered Barbie doll. The cabin in the Everglades going up in flames with Dokes inside. Deb standing in a church doorway. A hospital room where Harry sat with the understanding that his son found killing good. Harrison in the snow, holding a rifle, asking his father whether the people who died would still be alive if it weren't for him. I've been thinking about what connects all of these across such different tones and contexts and points in the franchise's run. And I think what they share is that they are all moments where love, in its various broken, complicated, Dexter-shaped forms, produces catastrophe. Brian loved his brother and built a killing spree out of it. Lila loved Dexter and burned a man alive for him. Deb loved Dexter and shot a woman who was doing the right thing. Harry loved Dexter and designed a code that shaped him into something that could function in the world, and maybe also something that couldn't stop. Dexter loved Harrison and left him and came back and then told him to pull the trigger. The show never presented love as redemptive. It presented it as the thing that makes the darkness interesting and complicated and sometimes worse. There's something about that which keeps the franchise going, even now with Resurrection continuing the story, with Dexter having survived New Blood's gunshot and being out there again somewhere. People are still watching, still caring, still wanting to know what happens next. Not because they think it will end well. And the show has been fairly clear about what it does with happy endings, and the answer is largely that it doesn't do them. But because Michael C. Hall is doing something in this character that has genuine rarity to it, a performance that makes you inhabit a perspective you'd reject entirely in real life, and understand it anyway, that's not a small thing. That's actually quite rare. When you think about what makes a long-running franchise sustain genuine interest, not just nostalgia, not just brand loyalty, but active curiosity, I think it usually comes down to a character who keeps generating new questions. Dexter Morgan has been generating questions since the pilot. Who is he when the code is tested? Who is he when someone he loves is threatened? Who is he when the code conflicts with survival? Who is he when his son inherits his darkness? The franchise has been working through those questions for almost 2 decades now, and it hasn't run out of new angles on them. That's genuinely unusual, and the thing about Dexter as a franchise is that it has outlasted most of the predictions about what it would do. It ran 8 seasons, It ended badly, it came back as new blood, and was better than most people expected. It went back to the beginning with original sin and found new things to say. It's still going with Resurrection, which means this story about a man who should have run out of room a long time ago keeps finding room. I find that genuinely interesting. I've got ideas for more evenings like this one. Original Sin has more to offer than one section, and I'd love to come back to it properly. Resurrection is its own thing entirely and deserves its own space. There's also a whole conversation to be had about the secondary characters across the original run, about what the show did with Dokes, with Quinn, with Lahuertu before she became the season's moral center, with Batistu, who somehow survived every season with his fundamental decency intact. I find Batistu genuinely interesting, actually. He is the show's only major character who never lost himself, who never compromised in the ways the others compromised, and that's quietly remarkable over 8 seasons. That might be a video. I also think there's a conversation to be had about the code itself, about how it evolved across the franchise, what it was at the beginning versus what it became, and whether it ever actually did what Harry intended it to do. Original Sin complicated that, as we talked about tonight. New Blood answered it in one very definitive way. But the questions the code raises about the relationship between structure and violence, between rule following and genuine ethics, between containment and cure, those are worth a proper evening of their own. For now, though, that's enough. You've been good company, as always. The show deserves the attention, and so do you for bringing it. But for tonight, the dark passenger can rest. Wherever you are, whether you've been awake for all of this or drifted off somewhere around season 5 and found your way back, I hope it was good company. Sleep well.